Welcome to another episode of Athens and Jerusalem. Let's begin where we can't escape. Let's begin with Logos.
Now, I would say that this openness, this being in the world, this referring to the world, to objects in the world, what I would like to call self-transcendence, this is disappearing as soon as you project a human being into a lower dimension than its own dimension.
The point of the V goes up to the nuclear explosion that created it.
Tell me this, Dr. Oppenheimer. Do you ever become frightened at what you're finding out here in this area that can't be measured in either time or space?
You see, that's a real point.
Do not be afraid. Open your hearts, open up your hearts.
Open up your hearts to Athens and Jerusalem. The infants of our culture, united, independent, polarized, and even bloody. Athens, the cradle of wisdom and rationality. Jerusalem, the cradle of faith and spirituality. In this podcast, we look at reunion. Could reason be more than modern secular skepticism? And could spirituality be more than belief? Welcome to another episode of the Athens and Jerusalem podcast. And today's episode, we have with us a guest, Rebecca Teclemariam. Would that be correct, Rebecca?
Yes, that's good.
So welcome to our podcast. And I know that Cameron is the one who knows you, and I've been wishing you to be part of our podcast. So I think he will be presenting you. So Cameron, please.
Yes, thank you very much. It is indeed my great honor and pleasure to be the one to introduce dear Rebecca or Dr. Mesbah to this program. And this is just a very, very brief introduction of who she is. She's an international speaker and mentor for education innovators who want to transform the future of upcoming generations and build a fairer world. And combining her passion for sciences and arts, she helps innovators develop their ideas and connect or reconnect with their ethical and scientific foundational principles to generate impetus and impactful projects. So this concept of integrating Athens and Jerusalem is very central to what she does. With more than 30 years of experience in education as a mentor, trainer, administrator, and teacher for all ages, Rebecca has worked with universities, schools, individuals on the board of several educational foundations. For instance, GEMS in France, and it was in that connection that I had the pleasure of getting to know her, and on board together in Switzerland. And she provides strategic insights for developing in innovative educational programs. And I've seen that really in action. And recently, Rebecca has been a speaker to major international educational conferences, such as the World Congress of Mathematics, Montessori Europe Annual Conference, the Association for Moral Education Conference, and the Netherlands Educational Festival. Rebecca's academic background is that she holds a PhD in neurosciences. And interestingly, in combination with that, an MA in sociology and an international Montessori diploma. That's, I think, in itself a very interesting integration of various elements. And if that were not enough, she has had several solo art exhibitions and published and illustrated several books. She addresses such profound topics that are often overlooked in education, such as what can mathematics teach us about our soul? Now, that's definitely a theme that you usually don't hear about, right? And how can we learn to belong? Or how is nature the best teacher of human values? So, as you can hear from this short introduction, we have a wonderfully visionary, innovative, and exciting guest today. And for my part, I also would like to extend a very, very warm welcome to Rebecca and thank her that in spite of her busy schedule, she's been kind enough to allocate some time to this podcast.
Thank you. It's always nice to share ideas with others.
But I think maybe we should. I know that based on what Cameron has said, I'm like interested in all the three final topics. But I think we should start with mathematics and ethics. I think that's like a very interesting combination. And yeah, in many ways, it is Athens and Jerusalem, as mathematics is often understood as very logical and then scientifically topic, and ethics more connected to religion in the beginning. So, Rebecca, could you just explain for us, like shortly, what is the essence of the connection between mathematics and ethics?
So to start, this reflection started from, I've been developing and giving classes of religious education in a Montessori school for more than 10 years. It was called the Ethics in World Religions. So we were discussing a lot of different topics with the students from 5 years old to 15-year-old. And one day, one child, he was about 10, he told me, you know, in mathematics, they say 3 plus 1 equals 1 plus 3, but it's not true. And I said, oh, why is that not true? He said, because if you have one apple and somebody gives you 3, it's not the same feeling than when you have 3 apples and somebody gives you 1. And I thought, this kid is onto something. This is really what is behind numbers is very interesting. And this is what I've been looking into and thinking of starting with something very simple. For example, that one-to-one correspondence is the foundational concept that you learn when you're a child, you know, that this number 3, for example, only corresponds only to this quantity of whatever, like 3 cars, or like, and you do these exercises over and over again, so until you understand really the meaning of the symbol of the number and the quantity that goes with it. Okay, so it's really about symbolism, that you understand 3 is just a symbol, but it means something in reality. And you do this in kindergarten, and this is a very foundational concept that you learn in early years. But then I thought, how about I like to visualize everything into graphs or tables, and even like people who work with me were like, oh, not again a table, oh, not again a graph. But for me, it has to be visual. And I thought, if we think of this one-to-one correspondence, like each time I take a piece of chocolate, it creates a feeling of pleasure in myself, you know? And then if I take 2 pieces of chocolate, it's double the pleasure, and 3 pieces. And then you can increase this, and it looks like it could be an infinite correspondence. But also, because I'm a biologist, I know that there is a limit to that. And in French...
Not where chocolate is concerned.
Sorry?
Not where chocolate is concerned.
But in France, we call this, it's also a very interesting thing. It's a very French disease. It's crise de foie, which means liver crisis. And apparently I read something about ethnological research about, you know, the different diseases that each country has. And this is a very serious disease in France. And you have huge departments of, you know, hepatology, because everybody has liver crisis from eating too much. So eating too much chocolate, you know, makes a liver crisis. So that's basically the limit of the possible increase. But then if you would look at something that is different, which is non-tangible, like one-to-one correspondence about, acts of generosity and friendship, for example, then the more acts of generosity, the more friendship should increase, the tight. But you could also have the liver crisis would be the equivalent of, limited time or limited resources, or that you can't just give time and generosity, showing your generosity in giving things. So it is when you see generosity as a non-material thing, then you have to see it as a spiritual value. Then it is not limited, and so this correspondence can go on for forever. So that was what the examples, for example, that I used to explain the difference between generosity being, I give you something and eventually one day you'll give me something, but generosity in terms of a very material expression of something, if you think of it as a value of your character, that is generosity in also other ways that are non-tangible, then mathematics show you that the correlation can be infinite. So that was one way of explaining what are spiritual virtues to young children. And one other example we used, because we were looking into the human body, and you see that, for example, when there's an amazing capacity of the human body, that is when a mother is nursing her child, if she doesn't have the resources in calcium in her food, the body will take from her bones. And this is a natural phenomenon that happens. And in a way, it is the idea of the body is sacrificing itself for the child. And so we plotted this thing in terms of how is there a one-to-one correspondence in terms of sacrifice and in terms of survival. And then we looked at that, and we saw, like, is there in all the different ecosystems that we know in terms of our human body, in terms of human connections, what does sacrifice mean, and how does it help for our survival? But then if we thought, okay, but if you're not in a situation of war or famine, maybe you don't need to sacrifice your bones, you don't need to sacrifice your life. But what would sacrifice mean there in terms of human connection? Would there be a one-to-one correlation in between this capacity that I would have to sacrifice my comfort, for example, or my time, to increase the connection between other people, or me and other people? So that was also another way of looking at how this mathematics would that connection, that correlation, be again infinite. Because the way we can sacrifice without, of course, the ultimate sacrifice would be sacrificing our life. But if we stay alive, and that's, for children, that's, of course, we're alive, then you're thinking in terms of little sacrifices that you do constantly in your daily life that you can increase, and then that helps you and others develop this connection. So, for example, when we're having a group discussion, sacrificing your own opinion, so letting go of this wanting to have the last word, that's a small sacrifice for a child, but that's already something that will help the human connection, because it will help other ideas to emerge, and they're able to understand that. So in that term, you would see, like, we would always plot these things in charts and see, so how much sacrifice can we do more? And we see that in terms of the idea of understanding the idea of sacrifice in terms of living sacrifice and not dying, then we see that there is always something more that we can do that would bring more connection in the group, or more connection between two people.
And if I understand you correctly, you can like modeling these different examples by mathematics and different mathematical models. Is that correct?
So, yes. So really, but very simply with a simple graph where we would put down there sacrifice and connection, and then plot it against, okay, how much more sacrifice can we do? Would that bring more connection? And see if that is true. See if that one-to-one correspondence would actually be still true. So this correspondence is interesting because it's always like you have to go back and forth to check with if you always have the same quantity, like for example, on both sides, and if it is actually really connected. And for children, especially younger children, this is a very visual way of seeing, how can I do more? How can I improve myself? And in something that is non-tangible, but that has also maybe non-tangible results, but they're very good at seeing that.
Yeah, so that means that what is important to make this kind of modeling is to find these concepts, like, as you say, sacrificing and bringing more into the community, to the community. That could be like one. And I've done the same actually with discussing about risk and control, how these two parallels also can be shown as a mathematical sign. I am just one example, because I think what you have tried to show us is how like practical ethical action actually can be like experienced or expressed through mathematical models. I have a different experience from my own. I was out observing a teacher. It was second grade, so that means that the kids were like 7 years old, and they were had the first day with division in mathematics. And this teacher started, the whole set was starting with this question, do you, and she was directing to one of the students or the pupil, do you share equal with your sister? And this was like the whole idea of division. And I just realized that division is actually, that's like for kids, is really like the essence of justice. And then I realized that even, it's not like practical ethics always has to come first and then mathematical, because we could show this mathematical, but just normal mathematics, just experience like division, or experience that actually for every human being, 2 adding 2 equals 4. That's not something that is different from anyone. So we can even learn universalistic experiences through mathematics. I think that's also part of this connection between mathematics and ethics.
Yeah, and for smaller children, they also understand this, one-to-one correspondence. No, I mean for older children, like 11 to 15. For example, when you think about wages and profits, is there one-to-one correspondence? Like, this is a big, this debate in the world now. The profits increase, but do the wages of the people who are working in these companies are increasing as well? And that's one thing. So they were discussing about how, if we would develop a model where there would be a one-to-one correspondence, then there would be more justice in the world. but also, for example, we were inspired by this quote that says, beware lest you walk in the ways of those whose words differ from their deeds. So we also plotted the deeds and the words and say, okay, like if my words increase, then my deeds should increase, or if my deeds increase, my words should diminish, or something like that. And we were like, okay, how would we plot that with a mathematical graph? And then what would be the outcome? The outcome would be trust, for example. So it was interesting because with the little ones, we were looking at what creates the crisis in the system, and usually it's the limitations of the material world, okay, like the liver crisis. And so the goal was to show them that the spiritual values have no limitation. You can always increase in being more patient. You can always, but with the older ones, we were looking also at how the material world and how we use the material world can create spiritual value. So how we, by our deeds, by what we are doing and how we are working with it and how we are plotting it against our ethical principles, we are able to create a system where, justice or trust are actually permeating, the whole system that we're creating. So for me, that was the interesting thing, because then it became also a research of trying to find, in a way, the formula, which, young people always want to know the recipe to become rich and famous, but like they see that it's not per se a recipe, it's a formula that you work on. And if you want it to increase, then you have to also increase, for example, your deeds and rather than your words. Anyway.
If you actually find this formula, then you have to share it with the rest of the world, because
yeah, I think it's an individual formula, and I'm still looking for it at my age. So,
but I mean, specific formula aside, I think it's fascinating that in this way, even young children can come to an understanding that there is this correspondence between the physical reality, or let's say the scientific reality that mathematics represents, and a metaphysical reality that is the values and the ethics that we understand. I think it's very fascinating to show this principle of homology that the ancient Greeks referred to.
And you see it also when later, when they're older, they do the sets, and it's the same thing. It's about also one-to-one correspondence, but a bit more advanced mathematics. And we look at the different sets, I don't know, human body systems, religions, family names, and then they see that the more you're able to, for example, identify, like find the number of sets you belong to as a human being, then the complexity of the world increases. But what crashes the system, in a way, what crashes, like the liver crisis in this case for human society, is nationalism and fundamentalism, which has a tendency to diminish the number of sets you are allowed to belong to. You're supposed to belong only to this group and not to that group, and it's always an exclusive thing. So then we looked, okay, so what would be the importance? What would be the thing that would stop the system from crashing, like prevent this rise of nationalism and fundamentalism? And bear in mind that I live in Bosnia, where 30 years ago there was a very bloody war that was based basically on nationalism and not fundamentalism, mostly nationalism. And then they came up with this idea that this capacity to understand diversity is correlated to this capacity for unity. So there's this set. So they developed this set of all the capacities that are necessary for understanding diversity. And on the other hand, the set of unity. So all human beings, what do they have in common, and what makes them human? And then they saw that what was important for that is to develop this capacity to understand diversity was linked to having an open heart, having an open mind, and also the being able to see the diversity. So, for example, very simple, we looked at, why humans have different colors of skin, and the scientific basis behind that. And then we looked at this great art project that is by a Brazilian photographer. She's called Angelica Das. And she takes portraits of people from around the world, and she matches them to their Pantone skin color. And then she shows that it's like, so many infinite tones of skin in the world. And then they were like, okay, so the human set is so huge of colors, while the tendency of race classification is, white, black, which is white people are not all the same color and black people are not all the same color. So you're reducing. So they were thinking, okay, how can we increase, this seeing the diversity rather than to limit it to something that is very bland and very boring. So again, this idea of sets help them to see all these different capacities and the result, higher, understanding, appreciation for beauty of of the human being, and seeing things in others that you're not able to see otherwise.
I love the imagery of the apples that you started off with, that if you have 3 apples and you're given 1 apple, it's very different than if you have 1 and are given 3. And it made me think of apples as the larger example of money. And, we live in a society that's so governed by the idea of money, which is, a number. Everything around us can be converted into that number. Everything has a price. You can think of all the objects in your house, and if you wanted to sell it off, well, I could sell this book for that, I could sell this object for that. In your mind, of course, that the value of those things is completely different and loosely, if at all, correlated to the price that those items would fetch on the market. It reminds me, I think, of a statement by Oscar Wilde about people who know the price of everything but the value of nothing. But here we are. We live in a society in which everything is extruded onto this one-dimensional this one-dimensional sort of graph of the value of a thing, of the price of a thing, and the value tends to drop off. And one of the ways that we think about, or one of the consequences of that, is that the price of something is fundamentally a zero-sum kind of a thing. If I have this much money and I give you that much money, then I have that much less money. Whereas perhaps the realm of ethics escapes that zero-sum mentality. You're in the realm of value, where is in the song I learned as a child at summer camp, the love is like a magic penny, you give it away, but it comes right back to you. So that's an early example of the sort of non-zero sum mentality. But you mentioned the sort of trying to think about this realm of value also in a sort of quantitative way. Is there a way in which certain actions have a non-zero sum effect, maybe even infinitely correlated to some other good, which suggests a way of thinking about value, which maybe puts it in another dimension than the zero sum dimension of money or price. And it got me thinking a little bit about whether and in what way it's useful to think about this realm of value as just some other realm that can also be quantified usefully against, you know, the realm of the price of something, versus trying to think about the realm of value of something which intrinsically cannot be quantified. Where do you think? I don't know if that's even a very well-formed question, but you know, we're talking about like a dimension of reality which is not reducible to this zero-sum, you know, cost dimension. Is that other dimension, that dimension of value, something which is quantifiable or not? And what would be the consequence of that?
I think one of the things that we live at the moment in this very dire environmental crisis, and one of the things that's very useful to think about this environmental crisis is negative numbers. Because we're living at this moment in the realm of the negative numbers, but we also live there because of the negative numbers in ethical values. So for the moment, for example, we are in a stupid situation where a tree, if it's living, has hardly any value, but if it's cut and then sold on the market, then it has monetary value, when it's actually a negative value, because we took something out of the environment and we create, a carbon debt, basically. So we're creating these negative values. And the reason why we do that, and the reason why we prioritize that, is also because we're in debt in ethical terms. Like, we think money is more important than, you know, all the services this tree was giving to nature, to humans, to the planet. So for that, it's also interesting to see that there is a correlation between because the prices we're valuing things at the moment are not the real prices. We are completely dishonest, and we're in debt of honesty in a way, because we're not counting the environment impacts that you know, creating this cup or this pot has created, you know, has given to the planet. So in a way, we are very we don't see the correlation between pricing something and being honest towards what we are actually really doing to the environment. So we are I don't know if I'm answering what you were saying, but in a way, we are also creating this debt that we're having in terms of ethical principles. And so there is a correlation between both. The realm of values is not a realm that is above us and that has no impact on what is happening to us at the moment.
If I could try to say how I understand what you're asking for, Stephen, asking about, I think one of the big, like, what is often understood in our society is that mathematics and economy is the same. And this is, of course, not the same. In a way, based on what Rebecca is telling us, we can say that economy is just a kind of economical, a kind of practice. And it is a practice that is very easily turned into numbers. Because in itself, it has very simple way of understanding things, and it is, as you say, Stephen, it's a null-sum game. But what Rebecca is trying to tell us is that more ethical way of doing, more these values that actually are of interest in us, this could also be expressed mathematically. So instead of just reducing everything to economy, and economy, that means it comes from the Greek word oikos. It is about privacy. It has nothing to do with public and police. But what Rebecca is talking about is all these values that actually should have value in our police, in our public life. And of course, if we start to think this mathematically, it would be easier for people to actually visualize, to understand, and to show what this is all about, and what this actually could be like, giving more, not only one-to-one, but even increasing our life as human beings.
Maybe we could sum that up by saying that whatever we might think metaphysically about the realm of value being quantifiable or not, we can say that on a practical or pragmatic level, it can be very useful to try to bring value into the dimension of quantity, because it's very easy for us to envision, it's very easy for us to think about the impact of it. But the metaphysical conversation about, which brings us back to sort of our common theme on past episodes about dualism versus monism and so forth, that conversation is kind of set to the side for these purposes.
Yeah, maybe because it's very easy for us as human beings to actually understand that love is much more important for us than money. Mm-hmm. But it's so much more difficult to express or to show love in a mathematical model than to show how much money you get if you, So I think it's really beautiful what you're doing, Rebecca.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have tried this kind of a more interdisciplinary approach at school, instead of having single subjects, to bring different fields of science or different subjects together around the theme. And whenever I have tried to do this in schools, the subject that has always sort of dropped off has been mathematics, because it's been somehow you get to combine geography and history and I don't know, literature and arts and all of these. But then mathematics often is the sort of the odd one out, and neither the others see a place for mathematics, nor do the mathematics teachers see how mathematics could fit into anything like that. So then you get all these other subjects into a thematic entity, and then you have mathematics as a some sort of a pariah that doesn't fit into the society. So I think this is beautiful, Rebecca, the way that you have shown that mathematics can be brought into this broader picture, and it can be made as something which is both scientific, but also that it in a way corresponds with a truly human experience of reality, so that it also reflects that less tangible aspect of our humanity.
I mean, it's very I'm a great lover of teaching outdoors, and I think because from nature we learn so much. Yeah. But it's easy for me because usually I'm teaching biology, even though I had parents who asked me, but what does biology have to do with outdoor? So anyway, but so for math teacher, that's even harder. So, mm-hmm. and I think there's a lot of, the spiritual concepts that can be learned, and also what nature teaches us as well is also this developing this capacity for understanding complexity. So for understanding that two ideas can be seemingly opposite ideas can be true at the same time, like diversity and unity. If you look at the leaves of a tree, they're all the same, but not exactly the same. They're a little bit different. Each one of them is individually different, yet they're the same, and they're part of this unity that is the tree, but there is diversity within this unity. So from there, you can see, there's unity and diversity can coexist at the same time. They seem to be very opposite. But from a young age, you can understand that, you can hold two ideas that at the same time in your head. And I think that's one of the most important things that, you learn from nature. All these things that, there's what now they say they do in math, and they try to teach is the systems thinking, and I think learning about ecosystems is the best way of understanding what systems thinking is actually, and what it gives you also in terms of understanding of the human life, because in nature you have a season for planting, a season for growth, and a season for harvest, and you have the same in human life. You put the effort in learning. I'm learning Chinese at the moment. I'm like in the season of planting, and I'm really suffering with that. But I know that, there is a progress, and there will be a season for harvesting eventually before I die. So understanding these concepts also is important when you grow up, that you understand that, your growth is part of a natural process. How you have this feeling when you're a child that adulthood will never happen, that you're never going to be a grown-up. And then you have to also understand that, this is the season for doing what you're doing, and later you'll when you're a bit older, and maybe next year for some children, you'll be able to reap the harvest. So yeah, another example.
Wonderful. There's another, because on top of everything else, you're also an artist, right? And in the logo of our podcast, we have a picture of fractals and a piece of Islamic art, which both show the connection of mathematics and beauty or art. And I think you will find a similar kind of, and I think in one of our podcasts we talked about this correspondence in music, that music can be presented in terms of mathematical patterns, but it still, as an experience, obviously somehow exceeds that kind of portrayal. And I think it's the same thing with art. And I don't know if you would like to say something about the connection of mathematics and art, or is that something that
there's something to be said about the attraction of the human soul to symmetry and to order, and mathematics does that as well. So there's also, I think it's Richard Feynman who was rewriting a lot of the mathematics to make it more beautiful, and everybody was talking about how elegant his way of solving things was. So there's words used normally for something, for art, were used also in mathematics, and there is something about that. Whether I'm I have how would I formulate that? Whether I am as good an artist that I am able to show it is to be, because at the moment what I'm doing a lot is doing illustration, and for me it's more a way of making something more understandable and more visible to those who are for whom the written word is more difficult. So it's really about that, and about making things graspable. I don't know if that's an English word.
Yeah.
So yeah, and using a lot of humor as well, because I think what makes you laugh is actually what you remember. So that's why I always like collect jokes and try to use them, so that it also makes the world a little bit more light in a way.
Another profound connection between mathematics, we mentioned mathematics and beauty. Also, the connection between mathematics and reality itself is worth a question, I suppose. The physicist Eugene Wigner is famous for many things, but perhaps most famous for his simple statement that mathematics has a kind of unreasonable effectiveness, that it's an activity that from one perspective is purely a function of our brains, and we're putting ideas together, we're following the logical consequences of ideas, following on certain hypotheses that we take as given, certain axioms. And then lo and behold, we go out into the world, we investigate nature, and it follows those rules of mathematics. And there's no reason a priori to believe that that ought to be the case. It's almost a kind of a magical connection between these ultimately highly complex configurations of mathematical symmetries and theorems and so forth. And those end up being the foundations of general relativity, of quantum mechanics, of the of the deepest insights that we have about the operations of the physical world. Why should it be the case that mathematics has any relationship to reality?
There is I mean, in the tradition, in the old traditions in Ethiopia, where my father comes from, the names, so the names we're given have also a mathematical value. So it's the language of Ethiopia. Most of the ones that I use Amharic is a Semitic language, and like Arabic and Hebrew, there are values attributed to each letter. And my father believed in this so much that because he said, I saw it with my own eyes. So he had his elder brother who was given the name Tane, which is one of the names of the devil, because he was the first child to protect him from the devil. And he said, but he was a real devil. So when he was 13, his parents couldn't handle him anymore. So they had a gathering, and they chose another name with another number that was attached to it. And they told him, your name is not Tane anymore, it's Helawe. And if anybody calls you Tane, you don't answer, because that's not you anymore. And you're Helawe. And my father says he was the most gentle person after that. And so that was the proof. And I always laughed in a way, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking, the words we put in this world have an impact. It's also a physical, the vibrations, the intention, everything has an impact. So like by being able to give, these numbers to this word, this names, and apparently my name fitted properly my date of birth and where I was born. So my grandfather approved it. But I don't know. It is like there's more to it probably, but it's interesting because for my father, that was like the demonstration was done.
Interesting. I know the Romans used to have this saying, nomen est omen, that your name is an omen. So yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, just this interconnectedness of everything. I think just that fact, and the fact that reality at different levels seems to sort of sync, as it were, together. That there seems to be. I mean, I know this is a horrible thought for a postmodernist, but the idea that there is some sort of a grand picture where all these different approaches come together and they're harmonized and they support each other. I think it brings a greater sense of meaning into existence and a greater sense of beauty also. That because I think so many people on a very sort of daily practical level experience life as a bunch of pieces of jigsaw puzzle that never come together. And I think even our education is very much like I always imagine that children coming out of school, they have like this huge sack they're carrying on their backs with like thousands of pieces of jigsaw puzzle pieces, but they never get them together into a coherent picture. And I think what you have now brought to our attention shows that we can indeed and we should indeed be looking for that picture where all these different pieces, whether they're different scientific disciplines, whether it's the metaphysical and and the mathematical, whatever, they all come together, and you can see this multi-dimensional, beautiful, diverse unity.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think if one of the things that children would leave school with would be, the scientific method would be great, because it's very, the tendency you see is that people try to find connections, and then they see all these conspiracy theories, and they develop all these, metaphysical things, and it becomes even something that is a burden for their development. So I always tell this joke to my students about the scientific method, and I say what it is not. But I tell them, it's this guy in the suburbs of Paris, and he has this little house and a little garden around it, and he puts these golden Eiffel Towers around his garden. And then his neighbor comes and says, "What is it for?" He says, "Well, it's to keep lions away." And the guy says, "But there's no lions in Paris." He says, "You see, it works." So this is like what is the danger of trying to see correlations in everything. Yeah, you have also to try to maybe even for yourself experiment and be like a true seeker in a way. Yeah.
I think what you say, what I think of is that I like the idea of scientific methods, and it's plural. That's very important that we understand it's not only like natural science, and I think, for instance, what you are trying to show us in the connection between ethics and mathematics is also like that math is also scientific methods, but it's not the same as natural science. And I think if we are to try to experience these interconnectedness that we can feel like deeper, I think we need to we need to just to say that, okay, our senses is not everything that exists. We can't we can't experience everything just by our senses. So there is more to life. But then of course the discussion would be like, is it, for instance, possible to make some of these interconnectedness self-evident, or is it possible to make it mathematically? Or and even to think that we can try to create new kind of scientifically methods to actually try to grasp these part of existence that we for the moment have no way of knowing how to express. And what I really like, based on what we have been talking, I'm really like, why is there so many people on this earth that are spending their life trying to bring economical values to express them by mathematics, instead of what you, Rebecca, is trying to tell us, that why not try to make to express love by mathematics, or friendship, or belonging against alienation, all these kind of really problematical experience human has on earth. If we could like you said, Stephen, about Oscar Wilde, or how I say it, is that we should stop giving value to the things we believe we are able to measure, and start to measure the things that we actually have value in.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that are about reflecting on ourselves. When I say that, it's not just ourselves as a human being, but ourselves as groups of humans, but also this capacity to ask the right questions, and to see that refining the question is maybe sometimes more interesting than finding the answer. So in a way, the path is more interesting than really finding the perfect formula, like we said in the beginning.
Beautiful.
Let me ask a question that may, I don't know if it's the right question for the moment, but let the audio record show I'm holding up a copy of Max Tegmark's book called Our Mathematical Universe. His thesis is that it's not just that we live in a universe that happens to run according to the laws of mathematics, which then begs the question, well, why are the laws of mathematics in operation in this universe? He takes it sort of one step farther and says, our universe is mathematics. It's not something within which the laws of mathematics apply, but the whole universe is basically explained as a mathematical object. And if, and we're talking about potentially talking about the realm of value and modeling it in mathematical ways, perhaps as a useful way of expressing how important that value of dimension is. But someone like Tegmark would take it even farther and say, well, if we really had a full grasp of reality, we would understand that even this dimension of value ultimately is a mathematical object, and the whole thing can be reduced to math in some way. Is that taking it so far? Is that taking it too far?
But I think it's not reduced to math. Math is only, like, as we see it with numbers and equations, is only one way of doing math. If you're doing music, and musicians will tell you, the primal sound in the universe is music, then music is also mathematical. If you're doing poetry and you're, touching human hearts, and people, cry because you're writing beautiful poetry, that's also mathematical. You can also, bring it down to a formula or something, a number. And so it's like, for me, it is the same way love can be expressed in millions of different ways. We can, through mathematics, see that it can be expressed, like it's metaphysical representation can be in a million ways. And like reducing it would be exactly to say 3 + 1 = 1 + 3. And that's, making it bland. But if you, add the salt to the sauce, then you understand it is not exactly the same thing. And so that's the power of this language, or I don't know what we would call it.
And then there's one dimension we also we haven't discussed much, and that's the religious dimension. Could even God be expressed mathematically?
I mean, the thing is, what is interesting is to see the correlation between something that is unknowable and by our limited senses, to see how it correlates with our lives. And for me, it's always interesting to think, I mean, it's a very European, Western thing to ask whether God exists or not. And it's a question I've never heard growing up in Ethiopia, because it's not a question. And sometimes I'm thinking, it is, it's like saying, does air exist or not, And so in that term, it is more interesting to see what is maybe the formula that tells us, about how holding on to maybe this belief helps us or not, when we practice it, the way we practice it. Because the fact that God exists is there. It's like, a tree exists, and then what do you do with it? But what is interesting is what the tree does. It gives you shade, it gives, refuge to animals. That's the value of the tree, and it's, creating oxygen. So I'm thinking, maybe I'm too much into metaphors, but I'm thinking, if you are in the tree, like, is it interesting to modelize, the tree itself, or is it more interesting to modelize your relationship to the tree? And I think that would be more interesting, because then I have some elements to start with, which is, me as a human. While, trying to modelize something that I don't comprehend is very difficult. And maybe then it's asking questions that is not going to bring you any progress.
It raises an interesting, question of the nature of language and its mapping onto elements of reality. We think of, say, the word horse we think it simply maps onto some entity that exists in the world, but the word God, the word spirit, these metaphysical imponderables that have been debated for thousands of years, maybe part of the reason they're so imponderable is that they don't map one-to-one onto some sort of Platonic realm of entities, but maybe it's more like, it's more like a direction of travel than a position in like a three-dimensional coordinate system. Maybe the word horse is kind of like a position, and God is more like a velocity. Certain words do map onto existing things, but other words really are indicative of like a kind of direction of travel, in the dimension of value, in the dimension of ethics, or they set us moving in that direction. But to ask the question, well, does it exist or not? What's its 3D coordinate system? Maybe it really is just kind of an improperly formed question because of that weird trait of language that, all these different words, we think, well, all these different words must functionally be the same and they must map onto things, but maybe different words actually are different in a more fundamental way, that they don't have that kind of mapping. Just a weird thought.
I'm not like completely like I want to try to like give the possibility of the connecting mathematics and God, and the reason is that you say that we can try to make a mathematical model for instance about belonging, and yes, it's always difficult. What is the opposite of what is like? Is it alienation? Is it loneliness? Or is it like group thinking? This kind of. But anyway, this kind of, and of course, belonging. How to like mathematically, but when we talk about relation between something, then it's easier to make it mathematically, and so we can't. Of course, we could say that this is God, and say that the number one is God. But what we are thinking of, what I'm thinking of now, is that maybe we could try to model the relationship between human and God. Could that be?
Mm-hmm. And there's actually I think a Finnish philosopher who tried to express that relationship in terms of a mathematical model, and he used the example of a limit value to a I don't know what you call it, a formula. So you can have this formula where that it increases all the time indefinitely, and there's this limit point that it goes towards, but it can never reach it. So this limit point sort of produces an unending progression of a curve that can endlessly increase, but never actually reach that limit point. And he said that this is like what God is in relation to human beings, that we can develop and become more and more perfect in that direction, as Stephen was saying, of becoming more divine, but will never reach that unique and singular perfection of what we call God.
God is the asymptotic limit.
What's that?
The asymptotic limit is the
yes, exactly.
term, yeah.
Oh, that's what it's called in English. Yeah.
Maybe we should end there. I think that was a very like combining the whole, what Rebecca told us in the beginning about these mathematical models, and that it's actually, I didn't know about this, Cameron. You have never told me about this Finnish philosopher before.
Yeah.
So
You never
thank you
asked.
Then we are back to the questions, that I'm always asking the wrong questions.
No, I think that was one of the many jewels that came from our dear Rebecca was that questions are really more important than the answers, and yeah, that was very precious. Yeah,
I'm not really sure that always the question is more important than the answers, actually, but that's a different discussion.
Yes.
But of course, to ask the right question is extremely important, and often I think that we are asking the wrong questions, unfortunately, in our society. Okay, so I think we should end. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Rebecca, for being with us. And you have really shown me things that I've never thought about before. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
And to listeners, thank you for listening, and of course, hope to see you next. Hope to that you will hear our podcast the next time too.
You have been listening to Athens and Jerusalem, created by Cameron Namdar, Stephen Phelps, and Knut Ove Essay. Nora Juel is the broadcast voice and technical support. Music is pieces of Edvard Grieg's Morning Mood. The voices in the intro are Viktor Frankl, interview with Robert Oppenheimer, and Pope John Paul II. Thank you for listening, and please check out another episode.